We'll have a look at groups in this tutorial. Groups are a very handy function to help manage material on our timeline. As we saw at the end of the transitions tutorial, it's quite easy to start building up quite high stacks within Mistika. For example, if I were to blur this shot, add a title to it, maybe color correct it, etc. So you can see we're just building up towers of processes, which is a good way to see what we're doing, but it can make a mess of our timeline. So we have a function called groups, which in their simplest form are just containers. So for example, if I select all of these items and go to Edit, Group, all those items now collapse down into a single entity on the timeline. At any point I can ungroup a group. The shortcut keys are naturally G and Shift G to group and ungroup. But I can also go into the group and work inside them by using the navigate up and down here, or the page up and down functions on the keyboard. So I'll click the group and press page down. I'm now inside the group, so you can see that my other clips seem to have vanished. They're just on a level above me. So page up, and there they are. Page down, and we're inside the group. So a group is in fact more than just a container. It's actually an entire timeline inside a timeline. And I can happily work inside this timeline. For example, to make some changes to our shot, make it a blue background. And now when I page up, we can see, if I just put on my record monitor off my live video, we can see that my output is now the blue version. We can also change the contents of groups from the top level as well. If I double click to get the compose window up, we can see that next to our group there's a little arrow, and the arrow will open everything inside the group. So I don't have to go inside the group to actually make a change. Groups can be named. Its default name will come from whatever's inside it. But if we go to Edit, Attributes, I can change this to be whatever I want, remembering to press Enter after. So you can see that the group has now changed names. One note though, that if I were to ungroup this, so Shift G, and regroup, because I've destroyed the group and I'm now creating a new group, the name isn't recovered. Groups can work just like any other clip. They can be duplicated, they can be trimmed, copy and pasted, etc. Just like clips, when they're extended beyond the end of their content, they freeze the last frame. And this is a quite handy way of getting a freeze frame in a clip if you need to. For example, let's say I wanted to freeze this frame here. So I could place a cut in the clip. But of course, if I now extend this out, it's just going to run the clip again, because we're extending out into the tail of the shot. So in fact, if I trim back to the last frame, press G for group, but now extend out, because the contents of the group is defined as being that length, now my clip will freeze on that frame. As we saw, we can trim groups at the top level. We can also edit inside them. So let's say I shorten the length of the shot inside the group. Now when I page up to navigate out of the group, I'm faced with 4 options, one of which is simply not to page out. The other 3 options, the first one, no actions, leaves the group as is. So as we page out, we can see that in fact the group has stayed the same length, and if I drag along with a cursor and we look at the monitor down below, we can see at some point it just goes black, because of course our content has run out at that point. The next option is to adjust trimming. So this will trim the group to match what's inside it. So in this case, you can see at the point where the content ran out, rather than cut to black, it does its freeze the last frame trick. Then the final option is to reset trimming. That is to say, just change the length of the group to match what's inside it. As we saw, by paging down we go into a group. In fact, you can also have groups inside groups. So for example, if I group this last shot here and page down inside it, we can now see we're inside another timeline. So in fact we're in a timeline, in a timeline, in another timeline. So on here, for example, let's just do something simple. A little wipe to black maybe. So we can see that in this section we're making a little wipe like that. So if I page up, we can see in this section that the group is being fed into the blur and the color correct and the title. Then finally up on the top level of the timeline. If we build on the top level of the timeline, we'll have a look at what happens when we ungroup. So I'll just again build something pretty straightforward. So we're just now wiping the result of the group with another shot, so you can see all manner of things are happening now. If I ungroup this, so long as Edit, Setup, Auto Expand is on, then when I ungroup, Mistika will automatically change where the wipe is looking for the second shot and move the second shot to allow room for this to ungroup. Here goes. So you can see all the functions are now visible. Just pressing undo to go back a few stages. If on the other hand Auto Expand wasn't on, then if I ungroup this, as you can see it starts to overlap, and that will actually destroy the flow of the effect. Groups have one other trick as well, which is they can be used to help us with multiple versions. So let's go down into here, and as you can see I have something that says title. So I'm going to lasso and copy everything to a lower stack, and I'm just going to change this to another title. So now inside this group I have two independent things happening. Now normally you'd only see the top level because the bottom set isn't connected to anything, so looking down in our timeline this is going to block any output from here. And indeed if I go up to the top level we can see we're only seeing the top version. However, under Edit, Group Layers, we can actually select which of the different outputs inside the group is going to make it to the final output. By default it will be layer 1. If I switch to layer 2 and we look at the result on the record monitor, we can see that it's actually jumped to the other title. And you can also see the group has changed color on the timeline. So we can directly access 4 different outputs inside the timeline, or we can simply jump to previous or next ones with these functions. So the reason that works is that this little stack effectively has an output, and it's this top layer here, because this group is being fed into this blur, into this color correct, and into this title. So given that this isn't being fed anywhere, this is now an output. Likewise, this group is being fed into this blur and this color corrector and this title, but because this isn't being fed into here, it's a separate discrete output. So when we're jumping between layers on group layers, it's effectively jumping from here to here. So that gives an overview of what we can do with groups, and as you can see they're very helpful to arrange our timeline and to control complex stacks.